What's up, everyone? I'm Casey Kasem, and this is my podcast, Get Real with Casey Kasem. For this week's episode, I sat down with Joe Bryant of Football Guys. The conversation was great, and he talked with me about value-based drafting, boats and barbecue, high school football in Texas, growing a website, his interest in business, and so much more. Make sure to check out footballguys.com and give Joe a follow on Twitter at football_guys. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at @TheCaseyKasem and the podcast at GetReal_pod. This podcast is a proud member of the DAP Network. Oh yeah, P.S. This is the 50th episode. 50! We made it to 50! Here's to 50 more, and then some. Thanks everybody for your support. Now, enjoy my interview with Joe Bryant. Everybody is very excited that Joe Bryant is here with us today. I know you are listening at home. We're excited to be here as well. Joe, I'm thrilled to be able to sit down and talk with you because I haven't gotten that opportunity, and we've been trying to get this worked out. It's finally working out.
Thank you, Casey. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
And, you know, the first question I always ask people when they come on the podcast is, what was your relationship with sports like when you were growing up?
That's a great question. I was super into high school football. I grew up in Texas, and Texas high school football, as you may know, is somewhat of a religion, and we played Odessa Permian on our schedule. I went to Amarillo High in Amarillo, Texas, but we played Permian every year, and that's the story for Friday Night Lights. And so I was immersed in all that, and I fell in love with football then. And I was a good high school player, but wasn't good enough to play anywhere big in college. So that's when I quickly realized it was better to be a fan as a freshman in college, and it's been that way ever since. Baseball, oddly enough, I was probably more into fantasy baseball as far as fantasy sports go right off the bat. I got into that just, in college in the mid to late 80s. And so I started off first with fantasy baseball and then moved over to fantasy football. So
when you were growing up, did you have a favorite sports team or sports teams?
I did. This, oddly enough, and it's, see, this is when you talk to old people like this, Casey, you get into weird things that, it was back then. You didn't have obviously the internet when I was a kid. So you kind of picked who was on Monday Night Football. You only had a handful of games that you got to see, your local games. And I was somewhat of a Cowboys fan, I guess, living in Texas, but then actually a Minnesota Vikings fan way back in the old days with Chuck Foreman and Fran Tarkenton and those guys, Alan Page. And so that was a fun thing growing up. My brother was a big Los Angeles Rams fan, and we had the uniforms you got from Sears catalog, and I haven't thought about that in a long time, but yeah. So long time ago, Howard Cosell doing Monday Night Football was kind of the first memories I have as a kid of football. And I remember it was a big deal if you got to stay up for the halftime highlights. That now Red Zone today, Red Zone today just feels like a surreal world. Growing up there, you used to have to wait till Monday to see what happened on Sunday. Yeah, that's fun.
Do you remember any plays or specific games that you remember watching that really set it in stone?
Yeah, I would think, people my age, and again, I'm old, the Steelers' immaculate reception with Franco Harris, that was probably the play of the decade for a while there. That was a big one. And then a little bit later, and we have a lot of friends and a lot of people on the Football Guys staff that are Bills fans. And it seemed, for whatever reason, I seem to remember the Bills in the Super Bowl struggles and things there.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Victoria and Aaron. And
I mean, it's okay for me as a Cowboys fan.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah, there you go.
But yeah. Well, that's awesome. So you talked about fantasy baseball. How did you stumble across that?
I think it was honestly from a kind of a statistics interest angle. And Bill James, who you may know of, it was, did a bunch of the kind of pioneering sabermetrics and analytics, diving into stuff like that, kind of the Moneyball things that where, maybe we weren't looking at the right numbers that mattered and such. And I got intrigued by that. He used to do an annual book, and or not annual, but regularly updated, and just would, a lot of it, what he would ask, what is the real value of a walk, and where something like that, where nobody paid much attention back then to walks, and he could make the case that no, actually a walk is pretty dang important, and you guys are overrating these power hitters maybe, or you're underrating some of these other things, or if you're playing fantasy baseball, you're underrating steals maybe, and it's like stuff that maybe wasn't quite as glamorous. And that kind of led to the thing that I've done a long time with that value-based drafting. And where that really came about was with baseball, actually, when catchers who at that time didn't normally hit for much power, you could have a catcher that, if you did have a catcher that hit for power, he was incredibly valuable because everyone else had to also start a catcher. And baseball is even more sensitive to this than football, and that a bad player will drag you down. I mean, sometimes you'd be better off even not starting a player. It's like when you had I remember like Gary Carter, and I may be getting some of his stats wrong, but just somebody like that was a incredible value. He might only hit 19 home runs, but he was more valuable than an outfielder that hit 30 home runs. And that started sort of playing in. It was valuable because you had to start a player at each position, and you had restrictions there. And so that started me down that road, and just becoming interested. I guess some of it too was just the game factor. How do you win? If you want to win this, how do you win? And back then, most all baseball leagues were auction format, so it really put pressure on the owners to get your valuations right, and you had to come up with a good reason why Ricky Henderson was as valuable as Jose Canseco, even though one stole bases and the other hit home runs, that kind of stuff. But that got me started, just interested in it. And then when I started to look at fantasy football, there wasn't really much. It seemed like there was a whole lot more analytic work and thoughtful analysis being done back then at that time on baseball. And there really wasn't a whole lot on football. And my good friend and somebody that's been with us since the start on Football Guys, Doug Drennan, is a math professor and kind of a Bill James for football, in my opinion. And he was writing on some of these things, and we became close friends and started digging in. And the idea that hit me was, why don't we do this kind of stuff for football? Like I see these other people doing for baseball. And that's kind of how I got into fantasy football.
That's awesome. Yeah. A lot of people talk about starting off doing baseball and transitioning, or doing both.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time they'll say that fantasy baseball is harder than fantasy football. That's what I get. And as a person who's played fantasy baseball, but only a little, I will say yes, but that's just because
right.
It's a different beast.
It's a different beast. Yeah, I don't know it's any harder. It takes, because, and depending on how you play, back the way we used to play, when you would, you had to make lineup decisions every single day, it was harder from the standpoint of you had to be on top of it more. I don't think it's any hard. In fact, I would make the case in lots of areas, it's easier to predict baseball because you have such a bigger sample size. You've got, somebody's getting hundreds of at bats each year, and you can make in 100, out of 162 games, they might play in 150 of them. And so you've got a giant sample size of data to base your next year's projections off of. In football, it's so infrequent, it's just virtually, a handful of games lots of times. And just so many less at bats, that it's a lot harder to predict. I think you have way less, it's way earlier in the cycle usually for that. Added to that things change so much faster in football. You have someone that just, a running back that wears down in a year or two, and it just gets you start having massive changes and drop-offs and stuff. So they both have their case. The baseball guys think they're smarter, but I'm not sure they actually are.
Has playing fantasy baseball helped you with fantasy football?
Absolutely. Yeah, that it did back, and it primarily on that positional scarcity thing. Mm-hmm. The catchers, I keep, I just like that, just cemented in my head, in my mind, that like, oh, wow. When it struck me that and it just didn't make sense. You'd have two players that would maybe have nearly identical stats, one being a catcher and the other being a first baseman. and the catcher that could post first baseman like stats was way more valuable, even though they produced the same number of stats. And it's just it's like a tight end that can catch. It's like when you have a tight end going off, that they actually can be way more valuable than a wide receiver doing the same numbers, just because there's a whole lot more wide receivers that you can replace those values with, where there's just a handful of those elite tight ends. And if you have one of those, you can have a pretty strong advantage over your competitors at that one particular area.
How do you feel about tight end premium leagues then?
Love it. I love any rules that are weird, Casey. Scott Fish and I were having this conversation the other day, and it's like, some people like the rail. This is a good scoring system, or this is a bad scoring system. And I'm completely scoring system agnostic. I don't care. In fact, give me something weird. I would rather have, a super flex league is fantastic for someone who is into fantasy football, because they understand that having 24 quarterbacks starting every week instead of 12 puts a dramatically or twice as much pressure on the demand for more quarterbacks. So no longer, you better get a good one, because you might get stuck with quarterback, 20 and 24. And so I love tight end. And tight end premium is the same way. When someone understands tight end premium, and you can, I'm obviously biased because we built our website and tools around those kind of things.
Yeah.
But when you can, sync your scoring system with Football Guys League Dominator, Draft Dominator, and it will correctly value the scoring for these players based on what we project they're going to do, run it through that scoring system, and you'll see dramatic increases in value, for these top tight ends. So I love it. I love anything weird.
Did you, when you first started playing fantasy football, was it basic stuff, or did you throw in some wrinkles as well?
It was funny. That's another, you're bringing up all kinds of fun memories here, Casey. The first league, back when I first started, it was way more common to have just touchdown only. Like yardage was a I mean, it seems crazy now, but yardage was like this radical idea. And then points, PPR was crazier than ever back then. But I was in a league that had just crazy bonuses. And again, it's something that we just made up, but it had these crazy bonuses for quarterback rushing stats. And so if you had a quarterback that ran for a touchdown, it was ridiculous. I forget now what it was, but it was like, but what it made was like Michael Vick was like so far and away the best player when, and in a normal scoring system, he was a top player. But in my goofy scoring system, he was like the one guy you had and was a league winner, and so I like the odd systems because it gives you room to exploit. I mean, you want to find a system, and I mean, I tell everybody this: if you have any say in setting your rules up, throw in some wrinkles there. That way, when the other person in your league that just goes off the internet and gets a set of free rankings, they're going to have a lot harder time because they're going to go with an incorrect map, for your league. And so, I love odd leagues.
So when you got through with your high school career, and you went on, what was the next step in your progression?
It was really just being a fan. I mean, I got through college and was still playing fantasy baseball predominantly at that time. And was just really into it, diving deeper into auction leagues. Again, and that's kind of when that value-based drafting thing was percolating, and there was a lot in baseball written about that kind of concepts and scarcity. And I mean, it's not anything unique. It's basic economics, supply and demand determining a value. A funny story on that. I remember I bought a guy back then, the baseball, Daniel Okrent, and several other people published a book each year, which, I mean, when you think of it, they were publishing estimated value ranges for baseball players that had to be. I didn't know then how the publishing industry worked. The reality of it was they probably were the rankings were 2 months old probably by the time you got the book. And most leagues back then used only American League or National League players. You cut the league in half and drafted for these players. And I remember But they published values, you know, and it was, I think the dollar amount we used was $260 was kind of the standard thing. So I matched my league up with what they suggested, but we did not do just ALL, we did the whole league. And I remember the first player up was Ricky, who was it? Ricky Henderson, I guess. And the book said Ricky Henderson should have a value of like $47. And I got him for $32. And I thought, dang, I've stolen Ricky Henderson. Next guy's up, Mark McGuire, and he has a value of $49 in the book. And I got him for $41. And I think, man, I'm crushing this league. And then it started to dawn on me that because I had the entire pool of players to pull from, and this book was created with only half that supply of players for each one, that I was massively overpaying for these players. It wasn't really that Mark McGuire was worth $49. He's probably worth about $28 in that system. And here I was, and it took me I was about 2/3 of my salary cap spent before I realized I was in huge trouble. And that was a good lesson into valuation for me. So after that, I kind of set out, let's don't do this again. Let's figure out why these players will, what makes them worth this amount of money. And that when you think of it, Casey, that's really what our game comes down to, is who can best predict what the players are going to do. And,
right.
and then, then you either have a draft or an auction, and then it becomes who most accurately values what each player is going to do. You can't just know the stats. You could have perfect predictions and projections, but if you're not able to turn that into a value number, because most leagues, and it really becomes it's like interpositional relations. And that sounds like a fancy word, but it basically means what is a wide receiver value compared to a quarterback. And it's not, if they held every draft and had a quarterback draft, that would make things a lot easier, then you wouldn't, but you don't get to just draft all quarterbacks. You have to draft everybody at once. And so then you've got to make decisions. Is an elite tight end, worth a really great wide receiver versus a elite running back? And that's where the fun comes in. It becomes kind of a puzzle on how you value things.
I can totally see Football Guys written all over you with just talking about the start of everything. So when you decided, after college and everything, what did you go on to do next?
I went, we started playing, I created back, again, it's the Wild West back then. It was like, you could, you just decided you wanted to be an expert, and you weren't, there was a big, and it still is going, I believe, the LABR league for baseball. And it's basically a group of experts that play. It's like, just the top analysts play their baseball league, but there wasn't anything like that for football. And so I created, Greg Kellogg and I created a league called Fan X. And it was basically, we took 6 of us kind of regular people from the old message board, the usenet.rec, which is way before your time, Casey,
yeah.
message boards. And so we took 6 of us and then invited 6 industry experts, guys like Bob Harris and I think Ian Allen maybe was in it, and several other guys. And we created this league, and we just appointed myself an expert. And that really, and then we just started it and made it work, and wound up going to a couple of conferences and held built the website for it and ran it online. And Paul Charchian at Guillotine Leagues now was back then at Fanball, and we had a draft at one of their conventions and kind of put ourselves on the map in that way. And then a few years after that, it became evident that there was an opportunity for business in this. And that's when we started Football Guys. And I met David Dodds, my friend and partner, and we started the company back then, and realizing basically, just like a lot of things, it was trying to fill a need for something that we wanted. We looked at we're playing fantasy football, and I'm saying, man, I wish I had this or I had that. And I saw other businesses filling that, market in baseball, but there wasn't really anyone doing it or doing what I wanted to have in football. So we set out to create that for football, and that's how Football Guys was started. And it really comes down, I always say this, Casey, this is the thing for all businesses. It's not just fantasy football and not just fantasy sports. It's what problem can we solve? And it's not that, hey, we're really great at fantasy football. That's not a problem for anybody. The problem to solve is someone out there is trying to win their league, and they either need some help in some way. They need either someone to curate things for them. They need someone to do the quote legwork and sort through the mountain of news and distill it down to what's important, or they need someone to help them with projections and accurately predict these players. It's whatever they need. So our job as the business is try and fill that need, solve their problem. And that's what's, I think, if there's, we managed to stay around for going on 22 years now. And so I'm proud of that. And I think that's because we've always had that focus on solving the problem for, the customer.
I love how customer oriented the website is, how everybody, you've got a lot of staff and everybody, works real hard to make it that connective, site that you have. When you first found out there were other people out there that were like-minded, the internet was a big part of that, obviously. But when you were able to see that there were these people, how did you feel seeing somebody that liked the same kind of numbers and had the same kind of questions you had?
That's a great question too. See, it's again, we don't want to turn this to old guy football central here, but it is fun now of how fun and popular fantasy football is. It wasn't always that way. And back, in 2000, it was a little bit of an odd thing, and you had to explain to people what it was. And now, like you rarely, I bet, I know I don't have to explain what fantasy football is to somebody. They may not play, but they know what it is. And so, but back then it was kind of like finding, wow, I'm not weird. There's somebody else that likes this as well. And then it started, then that's when the idea for the business side of it started forming of like, wow, there's a lot of people that are like me, not just a few like me. There's a lot of people that are desiring the same thing I'm desiring. And so let's figure out how to, get something for them. And so, yeah, it was super fun. But, that's been a long time ago, but our business grew up on the internet. It was born on the internet and grew up on the internet and still lives on the internet. We've been remote since day one. The pandemic, for all the awful stuff with it, was in some ways kind of interesting sometimes. I had a buddy of mine calls me up 2 years ago and like, dude, what's a Zoom call? Like, what are you talking about? What's a Zoom call? It's like, that's how we've lived forever, so we were already used to that, but that our business was built on, on that kind of internet connection. And honestly, we would have never happened if I would have had to form every person contributing to it in just my local area. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, and that's not a tiny town. It's a normal size, medium sized town. But when you open up the whole world as a potential talent base, that you really get incredible people. And I think that was a key for us early on. We had folks from, California to, the UK. And so that it really opened things up. And so it was fun. It's fun connecting with someone that you think is odd. You have an odd hobby and you find they love it too.
That's awesome. That is so cool. So because I've never really worked on a website or anything like that, that's like foreign to me. How was that process? Like deciding we're going to start this website, we're going to do this thing. What was going on in your head?
Well, what was going on in my head was that I needed help. and that was where the partnership with David worked so well. I met David's a genius and was super tech oriented. And he had already done some another website site called Mr. Football that was great. And so he already, he understood the tech side of it and the database side and how we were going to do all that. And then I had a good grasp, I think, on the content side. And so it made a really good, a good partnership to start there. And I always tell people it's a lot, it's kind of like a marriage. Ideally, your partner, complements you in things you do. You may, hopefully they're good at something that maybe you're not great at, and you're good at something maybe they're not great at. And together, it makes a really great team. And back then too, it was a lot different then. Now when you start, you don't really need that kind of tech expertise because there's so many tools out there. You just, you have a website up and running on Wix or something like that. Just these almost ready built websites that you just start. You don't need a ton of technical experience, and WordPress makes things so easy with all the plugins and all that. It really kind of takes away some of that need to be able to program stuff. Now, when you get into the complex things, the stuff we're doing, obviously we have a ton of stuff that still is programmed in all of our tools and apps, and those kind of things are difficult, but it's easier to get in. It's easier to start now than it was back then, because we had to create so much stuff from scratch. I mean, when we did a podcast, we had to, there was no Libsyn back then. We had our own servers and doing all this crazy stuff for podcasts. Now you can drop in on Anchor and Spotify and StreamYard and you're up and running. and the beauty of that, though, I'll say this, Casey, it's kind of like iPhones and cameras and such. The stuff you can make now for like a video on an iPhone is stuff that when I was a kid, you had to be on a studio and you had to have a pass at the movie set or something, or to make something with music, you had to rent time in a real studio or something. And now, you have a MacBook and GarageBand and a few microphones, and you're off to the races. So it's opened up. It's made it so much more accessible for so many more people. And I just think that's incredible. That's awesome. It's sort of the democratization of talent, I call it. If you're, even 30 years ago, we could have never done what we did with having a voice in sports. You used to have to know somebody at Sports Illustrated or have an uncle at ESPN or, have some kind of in that you didn't earn. You just had to get in, or you maybe earned it. You had a great, degree from Michigan in journalism or Missouri in journalism, or the right schools. Now it's like, if you're good, get on a mic and show us what you got. And the world decides whether you'll, pass or fail. And I just think that's awesome, because it's let so many more people have a shot at it. And it's massively elevated, the quality of stuff. The reader and listener wins in the end, because the quality of stuff today. And I see it every single year. It's not just like, it's moving so fast. I see a new podcast pop out and I'll look at the video, and the intro is incredible. The graphics are awesome. It looks like something ESPN would do. And I look, and the person's got 8 followers, it's like they're just starting. Right. And it's like out of the gate, they're doing something that 10 years ago ESPN would have aired, and it's like, so it's so fun, and it's fun to be part of it. Now it's pressure. There's pressure for the old sites like us to keep up. It's like, man, this is no place to be complacent. 2022 is cruel to the complacent people, and which is fine. It is what it is. So you better get in and go, because there's a lot of people out there, and they're hungry, and they're doing really great stuff. So but it's a great time to be a sports fan.
I love it. I love the community. I love everything about being able to talk to people and learn more about them. And so I totally get it. And like, the internet has been such a game changer for so many things, obviously, but like with fantasy football, when you guys first started being, something that was ahead of the game, how were you able to spread the word about what you were doing?
If you figure that out, Casey, even today, you let me know, okay? Because we've got one of the unique problems. The beauty of the internet is social sharing. It's so easy. If you have a cool band or a cool clothing brand or a cool restaurant or any of these things that you think are cool, you're incentivized to share, because you get status points. It's like, oh, I know, Casey, she's the music person, and when she shares something, it's legit. So, and everyone is kind of that way. Everyone likes to share, and everyone gets credit for sharing, except for competitive games like fantasy sports, where people see you as their secret weapon, and they have virtually no incentive whatsoever to share you with their competitors. And it's a real thing. About the only thing that I think I can compare it to is like a raffle. You come across, or a sweepstakes, you come across a thing that, hey, your favorite band is doing a secret show, and at this location, the first, 100 people get a ticket. You're not telling anybody about that until the tickets are sold, or maybe your best friend, but you're not broadcasting that.
Yeah.
So we struggle with that in a big way of how, to get people to share. And now, fortunately, we've been doing it long enough, and we're kind of, thankfully, we're not that much of a secret anymore. So you kind of get it. I mean, I'm sure these guys would like no one in their league to know about ESPN too, or Twitter, but that's already out of the bag, So those things are sort of out. So we did it, and to your point though, that is really how all of our stuff grew, because we had virtually zero advertising. We have put almost no money in marketing ever, and just let the product kind of stand on its own and try to build it that way. And that's been a thing for us, but it is a real challenge on how you break through that of, hey, nobody wants to share you.
Were you ever worried when you first started that maybe it wouldn't take off the way that it did, or you wouldn't find success with it?
Yes. And fortunately, we never took any giant risk except for time. We started the company with $500. I mean, we've never borrowed a penny. We've never taken any venture capitalist money. We've never done any of that. So there was never any real risk of like, oh, we're financially, hurt if this thing doesn't work. It was really just our time. And so we started off, and you may enjoy this part. This was a funny thing. We did it for 2 years for free, absolutely no charge. And we knew back then and today still, there's basically two ways to make money on the internet. You either have a subscription service, like Wall Street Journal Online or Football Guys or any of that, or you have a free model that depends on advertising. And I knew I made and obviously both have massive merit and can work either way. Personally, I was always more in favor of the subscription model, just simply because your revenue coming in was totally tied to how good a job you did with that customer. It was a one-on-one. If I provide value for that customer, they'll pay me money each year. The other way with, an advertising model, you're at the mercy of an ad budget somewhere. When Coca-Cola or Chevy Trucks or Kingsford Charcoal decides they don't want to do advertising on the internet anymore, banners, that money could go away, even though you were doing a great job. So we knew we wanted to choose the subscription model, but we also knew that we couldn't just start off out of the gate. Nobody knew who we were, and to say, hey, you should give us money. So we went totally free for 2 years. And then on a third year, we knew that for me to stay married and for David to keep going and doing what he was doing, we knew we had to charge some money. And so and the big giant question was, how many of our free subscribers, and at that time we had 30,000 people on our free email distribution list. We talked for months. How of those 30,000, how many will pay? And it's funny, even now today, it's such a relatively new industry and business model. Nobody really knows, you can, some things like old businesses like direct mail, you can run a direct mail, advertising campaign targeting landscape in this zip code, and you can guarantee you'll get about X it might just be 0.1%, but sort of what you're going to get. In our thing, there's just been, or in the internet business, there's been so few businesses go from that free to pay that there just wasn't a lot of track record out there. So we had everything. We guessed about 5 to 10% would be our number of the 30,000 people would convert to pay. But we didn't know. And we made this big build up, and we told people it was coming and all this, and we were scared to death. And the question was how many of those 30,000 would go. And we rolled it out, put the paywall up, and the first week, 15,000 people paid. So we had half of our free audience converted to pay. Now that would not be true today. As that audience grows, we have a little bit over 600,000 people on the free subscription side now, and not half of them pay now, but that back then, that's what happened. So that was how we started. And once we had 15,000 customers, it was like, wow, this can be a thing. And let's start building from there. But that's kind of when I knew. But even then there was no risk. If it had ever failed, it would have just been, hey, the time is, we flushed the time, and it was fun doing it while, and so to that end also, it's funny, Casey, I've gotten more interested now. I'm as interested in business as I am fantasy football. So I think probably my next thing very likely will be, how do we help business people, whether it's your hobby is RVs or succulent plants or bowling or whatever it is to turn that into a business that you like. But I would encourage everybody, don't be crazy about it. Don't sign your life away. But if you can take a shot at turning a side hustle into something that might make it, and all you've really ever lost is time, you haven't lost anything, and if anything, you'll regret not trying it, I think. And nobody owns regret. So I always encourage people, if you can do it without any giant loss, be smart about it. But if you can do it where at worst case scenario, you're really just losing your time, I encourage people to go for it there. And that's what we did.
Yeah, that's my problem is I have a new side hustle like every 2 weeks. Like
Yeah, that's hard.
my attention span, I'm like,
well, talented people, like I know you are, y'all have that struggle. My daughter's like that. She's 21 and has a million things, that she can pick from. And sometimes that is a curse. Sometimes you've got so many things that it's hard. Yeah. You'll find it.
Well, so you brought up your wife. So I was going to ask you, how did your family respond to you deciding to go ahead with all of the football guy stuff?
They thought it was kind of cute, I think. It was, my dad is my dad to this day, God bless him. He's 80 years old and he doesn't even use email, Casey. He knows the internet exists and of course and all that, but he thought I was like, okay, it's like I'm stamp collecting or something, just totally a fun hobby. But again, it wasn't hurting anything. It wasn't like I was pouring, I wasn't spending half my paycheck on it or anything like that. And we could, even back then we could do, what we were doing and it was still just mostly sweat equity. It wasn't, we spent some money on servers and that kind of thing, but, it wasn't much cost to do what we were doing. So nobody really minded. But I did have to balance that was kind of the thing that, I was saying at 2 years in, we needed to see if this could be a viable business because I couldn't do that forever. I knew if I was spending this much time, at that time I had 2 children and there were 2 more would eventually come into the picture. And so it would have been unfair to them, to spend as a dad, to spend all this time over here on something that didn't really have a return to it. But I think it was a mix. To answer your question, it was a mix of, that's kind of weird. But now my wife was into it from the get. And because she's our business manager, she ran everything for us. So she managed all that and still does. So, she's the most capable person I've ever been around. So, she said, I think you're kind of crazy, but I trust you and let's see where this goes. And today, I think that was a good choice.
Is she a fan of fantasy football by any chance?
She's a little bit of a fan. That's a good, you've got all kinds of good questions, Casey. I'm thinking she's not all that much into it. And, we do a draft a couple years back and she's just crushing this draft. And I'm like, what is happening here? And she goes, and then she lets it slip that Sigmund said this was, so she's got Sigmund Bloom and Jason Wood and like all my guys coaching her up. And so she likes it to the extent that she's more of a casual fan and she keeps up with it, for just so she kind of know about what's going on. But she's more of a casual fan, but she's super competitive. Like she won. We had a staff Wordle competition that she didn't do as well as she liked there, and she was so happy that she won our March Madness staff contest there. So she's very competitive.
I love to hear that. I really do. It's really cool when family is at least, got the competitive side. So.
They do. Yeah. They crushed me in it. Yeah. So I was like, I went with my heart and picked Tennessee to win. That was not a wise decision. But yeah, she's into it. And then actually some of my other children are involved with us too. So it is kind of, I never really set out for that to be the case. But that's been how it's played out. And it's been great. It's been super fun. And they make it easy for me because they happen to be super good at what they're doing too. So it makes it fun.
So going back to when you were talking about, paywalls and everything, how do you determine what to put behind a paywall and what stuff to offer for free?
you might be you I feel like you've got a wire bug on my office here, because that's the kind of stuff we talk about every day. You want to, if you're going to be you obviously need to have a ton of free content out there to prove yourself. You can't, even though we've been around a long time, there's still tons of people every day that stumble upon us that don't know anything about us. And so they're not just going to sign up because I say it's good. So you got to be able to show what you can do, show your work, and give a ton away. If you give so much away that there's no reason for anyone to ever buy, you're going to have the worst thing possible. You're going to have a free website with no ad revenue coming in, and you'll just, go out of business eventually. So we try, and we feel like we've done a pretty good job with this over the years. And for a lot of it, it's been time-based. We'll have most all of our content free from now until, midsummer type. And so that gives a whole lot of information out there. And even if you don't come upon us until, August, when a lot of stuff is behind the paywall, you can at least look back at our stuff we've done through the summer and see and get a sense for, do these folks know what they're talking about or not? Or is this something that I think I'd like? And so it's that freemium model is really, about a seesaw, where you put that fulcrum point of where's enough, where to give enough to where they love you and still like it, and then where they'll pay. And I think we've mostly navigated that pretty well. We obviously make mistakes, but I think mostly we've done a pretty good job. And it's mainly respecting that customer. I think you give them, most people we find they're not opposed to paying for something they think of value. They just got to be able to see the value, And so if you can show them how good the content is and what they're going to get, it's not like they're freeloaders. People that don't want to pay aren't by and large, I don't think, do it because they don't want to spend money. They don't want to spend money for something they're not pretty sure of that's going to work for them. And then we also do a 30-day money back guarantee. So you come in, buy the thing. We want to take away, any kind of obstacle. Someone comes in, doesn't like it, and is like, no harm. I don't want anyone to have paid and not be happy with what they got. And I wish we could promise championships to every single customer. We can't.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
You got 6 people out of your league all using our service. Somebody is going to come in 6 there. But that is, and it's not just us. Fortunately, most all of our problems today, Casey, are also being experienced by a whole lot of other businesses out there. And so you might have a coaching consultant business and they've got that exact same problem. So there's a lot of talk about it and a lot of stuff written about it. And I think we mostly, been able to get it right over the years.
And you have there's a staff of people over there. We've brought them up already about having that group. How do you determine the type of person that you want working for the site and representing the site?
I've only gotten out. The joke is, Casey, and it's not a joke because it's true. If I didn't own the site, I don't know that I could get a job here anymore because we've got so many super smart people about football. And my job over the years is kind of morphed into, from being the player to being the coach. And I'm the general manager. I'm the one now that tries to set vision and assemble the team and put it out there. Sigmund Bloom is our Tom Brady. I'm just trying to be the GM and put these guys in the right places to win. So I think the biggest thing is, well, back up a little bit from that. With that being said, I think that's probably always how it should have been, because everybody can do, everybody has gifts and things they do well and don't do well. The one or two things that I do well is identified talent. I think I don't know why, but I'm just able to kind of see that pretty well. And so and the number one part of that identifying talent, I think, and this is where it differs maybe from some places, is that I think you have to be a person that we want to hang out with, aside from before we even talk about your football knowledge. If you're not someone that kind of fits in our thing, would we want to have a beer with you, a cup of coffee with you, hang out with you for a weekend? That's sort of a, kind of a non-starter thing for us, or a must-have thing for us. And then from there, that weeds out, and that there's a lot of really super smart people, and no offense to them, but it just doesn't fit our thing. And so we try to get that to start with, find somebody, and because to me, I think it translates to the customer, and probably the primary thing I'm looking for in that is somebody that's interested in serving. Like, we talk a lot about being the guide. We're not the hero in this story. We're the guide. We're Yoda here, and the customer is Luke. So that takes a kind of person that's a little bit less about me and more about how you can help that other person. And it's usually a person that's a little more selfless and doesn't mind sharing their things. And if you're in this and like, man, I'm going to hold all my secrets tight because I've got a big DFS contest going and I'm not going to share anything, that's not going to work for us, and I understand that. I totally get why they wouldn't want to share that with, our customers, but that's not how we do it. So the first thing first is we want somebody that we just like hanging around with. And then second is, do they have that mindset of helping that other person get what they're looking for, not just how smart they can look. And Twitter, there's a hand, you see a lot of this all through. And again, and not to say that there aren't sites that can't do that very well. I'm absolutely not saying our way is the right way. It's just the way that's been right for us. And that's worked for us. We kind of attract, I think, that kind of customer that fits our vibe. And it's, fortunately, there seems to be enough of those out there to make it, continue to work for us.
And you have so much going on with the site because it's so customizable and everything. Mm-hmm. What is the importance of your site not just focusing on like redraft or focusing on one specific thing, but having that wide variety of options?
Yeah, that's the thing too. The danger on that, Casey, is you don't want to turn in, to Walmart. You don't want to turn into the mm-hmm. thing that does everything kind of good, and the flip side of that is one of the beauties of fantasy football is there are a whole lot of different ways to play. I mean, I love it that we have people into IDP or people into best ball or people into dynasty or Devy or straight up redraft or auction. And so, just even those, that right there is a pretty wide range, and you want to be appealing enough to folks, but you also don't want to water things down. So we constantly are asking ourselves that question of how can, I'm a little bit, I don't know the right way to say this. I'm competitive enough where I don't easily concede that we can't be the best at a certain category. And it's like, so why not us? Why are we not the leader in this particular category? Yeah, it's one of 5 different categories that we cover, but why don't we lead here? Why, you tell me why we can't do it. If it was really just a point of, getting the people in and me kind of trying to manage it from the ring top area, that's doable. So but I love it that there's such a diverse, ways to play baseball. And I've lost touch with fantasy baseball mostly, but I don't know if it still is this way. But back then when I started, you played only one way. It was, an auction with this way, and if you might screw up whether you have AL or NL only and mix them all together. But outside of that, it was pretty set. It was 14 teams, I think, or 12 teams. It was a pretty strict way, and to get out of that was a little bit blasphemous. Now, sometimes that's fun when you all are playing in the exact same format. You can have your league in Tennessee and meet someone from California in their league, and you both can talk about the value of Ricky Henderson, and you stole Ricky Henderson in your league at 39 and he's got him for 42. And it's, it's that kind of thing. So there is value to that, but the reality for football is it's way more diverse in the system. So there we have to, to cater to as many as we can. But even within, you should see my email box. If you read my email box, you would think every single person in the world played a 32 team IDP dynasties Devy Superflex, and it's just, that's hard because you still have, and of course nobody I know no one sends an email that says, "Hey Joe, this is exactly what I was looking for. Thank you for that." It's always what you don't have, And so we try to strike that balance. You want to give as much as you can and cover as many people as you can. But you also have to be careful you don't turn it into a bloated mess, and kind of the standard for that, I guess we'll go back and say, okay, yeah, we're going to have that, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. But can someone still walk into Football Guys that only wants this regular 10-team redraft with PPR scoring and still easily get what they want without feeling like they're bombarded with a billion different other things? And it's tricky. It's tricky. Clarity is tricky. It's really hard. It sounds easy. Everyone else, I'll just make your your homepage should look like Google. It's just got a blank box. And it's like, well, that's great if you're selling a search engine. It's like we're a lot more like Food Network, with all these kinds of options. And you're trying to be clear for a person that comes in wanting, an Italian recipe in the midst of all these other kind of food items. And how do you get that clearly? And that's probably our biggest challenge, is how we make a ton of information easily accessible. And I don't know, we don't do that very well still. I think we can do better in lots of ways with that.
Oh no, you guys do a pretty good job if you ask me.
Thank you.
The value-based drafting, since you brought that up, and I really know that it's very intriguing to me, but there are people out there that might not know anything about what that whole concept is. Can you explain to the people listening that don't know what that is?
Sure. And it's really the core of that, Casey, is that you're not just trying to determine the value of a player at any position. Your task is, as a fantasy player, to field a starting lineup based on whatever you decide it is: 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a flex maybe, and 1 tight end. And so your job is then to take that structure and then figure out how all these players fit into it. And where it comes into mind is, so you're not just comparing the one quarterback to another quarterback, you're comparing a quarterback to a tight end, to a wide receiver, to a running back. And that makes it a lot more difficult then, because there are different size player pools for each one of those positions. With tight ends, you've got your 40 draftable tight ends maybe, and they, each one of the GMs in your league is going to have to start one of those tight ends. So if you have 12 owners, you're going to start 12 starting tight ends each week. Well, if you have that same league with 12 GMs and you're starting 3 wide receivers, there's 36 wide receivers that will be started that week. So you have a much bigger pool availability for wide receivers than you do tight ends. So then you start having to do the math and the calculation of, okay, a player that scores 8 touchdowns and 900 yards is going to score this many points, but that value of those points for a tight end is worth way more than those 9 touchdowns and 800 yards, whatever, for a wide receiver. And it really comes in to start measuring against like the peers at that position. So you're measuring tight ends against a baseline of like the worst tight end or the worst starter or an average, or kind of, we have a lot of algorithm magic stuff that we'll put in there to determine that, just dial it into the tightest degree. But it becomes a thing of not all points are created equal. And it's kind of the same with kickers. People sort of intuitively understand that with kickers. Nobody drafts a kicker early because there are a ton of good kickers. He's like, well, I can wait on a kicker and get, because they're all about the same relatively. And there's a whole bunch of them that'll be ready at the end, because there's a lot of the supply of kickers. And for some reason, though, people don't really, take that concept into the other positions. It's why in Superflex is probably the other easy way to see it. When you have, Superflex where you're starting 2 quarterbacks, the demand then on a 12-team league, instead of 12 quarterbacks, you're starting 24 quarterbacks as the league. So somebody's going to be starting a pretty rough quarterback each week. So you have a massive value. If you've got a top quarterback, the difference between that person and then the GM starting, the terrible quarterbacks at 22 and 24 is going to be pretty massive. So that's, and it that sounds more complicated than it really is. It's really just valuing against each, the baseline and the available players at that position. And then you put it all into one big pot and then let them sort out. And then the beauty too, all of our tools are totally built all around that. So we'll do all that for you with the Draft Dominator and our website, but you can do it yourself too. It's just work to do it on a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Anything that can make our lives easier, we're
I'm
we're
about
happy
that too,
that.
Casey. Well, in this day and age, and that really, you go back to problems. That's a thing. You're solving that problem of time in that. You've got, I don't know anybody that sits around and goes, man, I've just got too much free time on my hands.
Yeah.
And so if you can say, hey, I'll put this together for you. I'll put, the projections in this and the valuation in that and do all the math and have this and let this spit out for you. That's a value for lots of people. And it's still, now there's tons of decisions. I'm also a big believer, I think you are too, on this. I read your stuff is we're not running your team for you. We're a tool. We're one more thing in your toolbox that you can, pull out of here and weigh us against your own, your own thoughts. And I mean, most everybody, the whole base of being, a fantasy, sports player is that you think better than the GM of your real team, and so you want to make those calls. You want to put that player in the game or not. And so we highly encourage that kind of stuff. We love being the guide. Well, it's your decision. Ultimately, we'll like to give you input and to help you make decisions. And
for the people, I don't know how many people you've actually had to deal with like this, but I know that there are people out there that get upset very easily if the advice that they're given is quote unquote wrong, right? Even if it's not like wrong because of anything you had to do. It was wrong because the guy twisted his ankle or the guy, so, but how do you deal when somebody's upset like that? If you've ever had to deal with something like that? Yeah. Ever, like in every Monday, it's like, and it's reality. It's a two-edged. It's funny. I used to kind of take it personal, Casey, because you get, one, I think most people don't realize that I read every email that comes in. I mean, when you send out 600,000 emails each day, you get a lot of feedback, and because it's and that's my real email address is the reply to, so it comes back to me. And I think a lot of people, they'll write some really, I mean, I should that maybe that might be a fun feature. Take out all the names, but just publish my email box sometimes. But I'll get some crazy stuff and some ugly stuff and some funny stuff. And it's usually, that I've ruined their life, that they, I told them to start this player, and the guy that the fluke came out of nowhere that nobody else thought either. It's not like we're saying bench, Patrick Mahomes here. But something crazy happened, and almost always my tact on that is I have a pretty normal reply back. It's like, dude, I'm sorry. I'm with you. Because very likely I heard that by, the same thing that they're upset about, I've maybe done myself as well in one of my leagues. And it's like, I feel you. I wish we could have a perfect crystal ball. We don't. What we can promise you is that we'll do our dead level best to, exhaust everything we can to try to get you the right information. And almost every single time they'll come back and it's like, oh man, I'm sorry. I didn't know anybody was going to read that, or, that's exactly
I was in a bad mood or something. And part of it, it's nice and that they're so passionate about it. I love feedback's a gift. And I think you have to look at it that way. So I was like, I'll tell our guys, our staff is like, and, they cared enough, what the worst thing can happen is nobody cares. And so it's like, I'll stress to them, they cared enough to write this. They're passionate about our sport that they care enough to, to fire something off. And so I welcome that. It's really turned out in a good way. Some of it's off the chain a little bit, but by and large, it's all good. I had a Matthew Berry story where I sent him an email because he had blocked me. I had Matthew on here, so we had this whole laugh about it. But like I had said back in the day, everybody should block Matthew. Back in the day, I was a little jerk, who was like, "My team's so good. Why are you telling me that my team's not great?" So everybody, So I learned my lesson. But I was like, "Oh, I'm just going to send an email, and he's not going to read this." But he read it. He probably does. Yeah. So learned my lesson too. I was like, "Sorry," but. No. The good one on that is we'll do this rate my team thing where you input your team and they'll give you a grade. And that was you can imagine, Casey, when we built that, I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I don't want to be harsh on people. I don't want to rip them, but also I knew the first thing anybody's going to do first thing I would do would be put a terrible team in there and see what they give me, and
Yeah,
then
right.
and then like almost like I'd fake one and see if these guys are just, spraying sunshine here on everything. So we try to be realistic about it. And because it is a zero-sum game, I mean, not every of all 12 teams in the league, somebody's going to come in last,
Exactly.
and not everybody's going to have a great team that we think, even from the draft. And so but I always get at the end of the year people that have copied and saved their, C+ ranking that we gave their draft, and like, hey, you were wrong. And my answer always is, I'm so happy that I was wrong
right?
there. I mean, great, good for you, buddy. I'm glad.
Way to go.
And so, but again, it goes back to they cared enough that they, and it's like, guys, I mean, that's a gift for us, man, that they valued our opinion. Even if we disagree, we didn't like their stuff, they valued that enough to carry it for a year or a season. And yeah, so that's awesome. But I love the passion in the sport. I think that's we've taken more or less a conscious decision, Casey, over the years to stay true. I guess maybe the stay true to your first love of local leagues. I mean, that's our backbone. That's what, when we started, that's all there was. I mean, there wasn't any DFS or legal sports book and all that kind of stuff. So the whole thing was you and 11 buddies or 9 buddies or 13, whatever it was, buddies staying together, having a draft. And maybe they were high school friends or college friends or whatever. Maybe you still live in the same town, maybe you don't, whatever it was, but it was a communal, fun thing. And as the way people play fantasy sports has progressed over the years, and we participate in those too. Obviously, we have DFS content, and we love the big leagues. I mean, the FFPC folks are some of my closest friends, and we partner with them on our Football Guys Players Championship big contest with 15,000 teams this year and $500,000 for first prize. I love all that, but the core of what we do is that local league. That's the backbone, the heartbeat of this whole thing. So I love it that we've kind of managed to stay tight with that. And again, it's people that are passionate. I mean, they are passionate about that. And this year we've got some really fun stuff coming with Kevin Murray's going to help us do a lot of stuff with commissioner things. And how are we diving into that commissioner side? And I always think commissioner is fun in that it's really sort of two-sided. Half of it is sort of the accountant lawyer angle of getting the rules right and the format and structure and, making sure everyone plays by the rules. But the other half of that is like party director. I mean, it's like, how are we going to make this thing fun? How are we going to have excitement in our league? How are we going to encourage smack talk and, funny memes and this kind of stuff in the league chat? And so I love that kind of stuff. And that's really, you hope you're able to see, but there's going to be a concerted push back into that area for us this year.
That's awesome too, because you don't see a lot of content like that out there, and it's very helpful for us that are struggling to get our league the way that we want it to be. And what are your thoughts on live drafts?
Love them. Yeah. Now I love both. I mean, Scott Fish is one of my close friends, and I love although he's going to do some live drafts this coming year. I hope that's not a spoiler. Sorry, Scott. But I love live draft. Live draft is the best. If you're super serious about this and you want every edge you can win, to win, a live draft favors the more prepared person, because they don't have any crutches or any tools to rely on. With that said, a lot of times a fun, the Scott Fish draft that goes out over, a slower time period is super fun as well, because it kind of it's like Mardi Gras, it goes on for a little while. But yeah, and drafting I think most people agree that, to me, that's the biggest problem with a dynasty league, is that you don't get the full redraft every year. You don't get the giant. It's fun to draft the rookies, of course, but I love the draft. The draft to me is the most fun day of the year for the league.
Definitely. It's like Christmas morning, you're freaking out. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to draft. And my home league does a live draft, and 3/4 of the league's not prepared when they come because
Really?
they just
Okay.
want to drink and like have fun. Like by
Yeah,
the end of
that's
the draft, it's like they're just picking guys. It's like
yeah,
whatever, you know what?
yeah,
You guys have
whatever.
fun. And as long as we're having fun, like
That's
it's
right.
just a home
Well, and that's the
league.
key.
I'm
You're
just
gonna that's yeah. I mean,
yeah,
we're all about winning, but to me, you got to have fun. I mean,
for sure.
it's a little like cooking. I mean, I love cooking, and you see some of these folks, and that you see them in the kitchen, and they're just like stressed to the max. You know, they've got everything perfect, and it's all about just following the exact rule and all this. And it's like, then you see the person that's cooking, and they're like just in there, just enjoying themselves, having fun, and have a byproduct that comes from that. And it's just to me, it's just a lot more. It's a better way to do almost anything. So yeah, have fun with it, but I always say it's more fun when you win.
Truth. It is. It's great fun when you can win and just have a great time with your
Right.
friends. You know, that's the best. And
Right.
that's basically how fantasy football's like breaking it down coming when you first started playing fantasy football, you started playing in a league more than likely with all your friends. So yeah,
Right.
it is just such a great time. And you brought up food, you brought up cooking. And I know we were talking off air about barbecue, and you have, can you tell everybody just a little story about what barbecue and you have to do with one another?
Barbecues, yeah, I don't know how much time we have on this, Casey, but I love barbecue. I love barbecue as much as football, and a lot of the same things about the two have in common. It's usually a communal thing. It's a celebratory thing. It's a fun thing. It's doing it the old school way with over live fire is to me the quote right way to do it. And I live in the South, and it's a big thing here. And I grew up in Texas, and it's a huge thing there. So yeah, it's I love barbecue. And then we got into it. For a long time, I thought about a restaurant and doing some other things. And the other thing that has kind of been a thing for me is kind of compassion ministry type stuff and homeless folks. And there's a nice ministry in Knoxville that does a weekly gathering thing where they'll feed folks and have clothing and supplies and different kind of stuff. And I remember seeing it one time. I went down there to help, and what I was struck by were two things. One was how many people there were there when you don't have a standard come in through the front door of the mission type thing. When you have it in this open area under the bridge thing we have with no walls, you get a much broader range of people. You get people that are more or less off the grid, and not in the system somewhere. So you get that. And then the second thing I realized was, and not always am very careful to say this, Casey, that I don't sound negative on it, but a lot of those things have food that's like leftover stuff. It's yesterday's bagels or out of date, food or whatever that is almost ready for the dumpster, or maybe totally ready for the dumpster. And they do that just to not waste it. And it struck me as like, my faith is a big thing to me, and the Bible talks about first fruits, at the altar, and don't bring your garbage to the altar. And it struck me as like, why don't we come down here with our good stuff? Why do these people not deserve the best stuff I know how to do? So we built this goofy giant ass trailer that will cook 64 Boston butt pork shoulders at a time, and we'll roll in with this really good barbecue, the best I know how to do. I mean, I love it that I can say that. And this is bragging, I guess, but I think it's true. And on one night of the month, the best barbecue in Knoxville is under the bridge, and it's free. And I think that's super fun. And there's just a dignity in that part of it. It's not that it's again, I don't ever want to denigrate the folks that donate food like that, because that is a good thing. But there's some dignity in handing somebody a plate of food that you would serve your best friend. And so we started doing that, and that's been super fun. We've had our hiccups with COVID stuff, and we're just getting started back again. But it's super fun. And that's sort of been my connection. I've realized that's the restaurant I need. I don't need a restaurant. I've got enough other things going on that I can kind of scratch that itch of making food at scale, when I want to, and not have to manage a restaurant. Maybe one day, but not today.
That is just super amazing. Like such a great story. And being from Texas and barbecue is a big thing in Texas, like you said.
Uh-huh.
Was there a favorite spot to get barbecue when you're in Texas?
Yeah. Again, we don't, Casey, this will have to be a whole nother show here. Yeah, I'm impartial to Texas barbecue. I think it's the best in the world, but I think my favorite, Louis Miller, in Taylor, Texas. And, it was where I fell in love with barbecue. And I think they're still my favorite. Taylor's not far out of Austin and is just like the authentic. When you walk in the door, you should be able to judge a barbecue place first by how it smells. If it doesn't smell awesome, the second you get close to it, you know it's something's not up. But Louis Miller just smells like heaven when you walk in, and it's 60 years old, I think. Wayne Miller runs it now. Louis was his grandfather, and it just is steeped in tradition and hickory smoke and post oak smoke, and is just so incredible. That's probably my favorite. And then a lot of great Houston now is starting to crush barbecue. They used to kind of be behind, but Truth Barbecue in Houston is outstanding. Blood Brothers is incredible in Houston. There's so many good ones. Austin, of course, Franklin is the one everyone knows. It's fantastic. It's worth it. It's probably worth the wait at least once. I don't know every time, but it's incredible. La Barbecue in Austin is run by Leanne Miller. That's Wayne's sister, and the Miller family there. And then you get up north, and I mean, it's not quite as much North Texas, but Evie Mays in Lubbock is fantastic. You go to texasmonthly.com, and has a ton of that. They're kind of the Bible for barbecue, but yeah, Texas has got it going on.
Yeah, we have Hutchins in McKinney, so that's
Hutchins is good.
that's the thing everybody about. But yeah, there isn't a lot this way either. So
Hutchins
Lockhart
is great.
is pretty good, but like I don't know, I don't eat enough barbecue. So when you go to order, what is your go-to order when you order?
If I'm in Texas, it's a standard. I said you have to be able to judge, compare. So you need to get kind of the same thing at each place. So I'll get some, brisket has got two ends, a lean and a moist end, or fatty end. I get a couple slices of fatty brisket and a sausage link. Usually is kind of my go-to to compare. But usually, when I go, and we'll have to get together next time I'm out that way, and you go with me. But you go to a couple 3 places at once, so you got to pace yourself when you go through. You can't just go all in at one spot. But brisket is where it's at, and that's something that we just don't get much of in the South as good as y'all do in Texas.
And Knoxville. Yeah, I don't think barbecue when I think Knoxville, so it's cool that you're bringing that little bit of flavor there and helping out while you're doing it. So that's awesome. And you brought up being an entrepreneur and everything. So you, prior to the fantasy football business, what were you doing?
I started a boat business in 1990, Bryant Boats. And so I've always, I told someone the other day, Casey, I think I may have like authority issues or something, but I've always worked for myself. And that's it's also funny too. It's kind of like fantasy football. Back in 1990, it wasn't cool to be an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur meant you couldn't get a job at Texas Instruments, or IBM wasn't hiring. And now it's cool. But yeah, so that's all I've ever done. We started Bryant Boats in 1990, co-founded that company, and so for 10 years, that's all I did. And then starting about 2000 is when I started doing Football Guys and the boat company at the same time, and did that for 15 years. And then finally realized that I just wasn't doing a good enough job at either place. And so we sold the boat company in 2015. But yeah, and I always say I'm quick to point out it's that path is not for everyone. Entrepreneurship has its ups and downs. And pros and cons, and for me it's been the right choice, but it's certainly not for everyone. But it's the only way I've ever known. So I'm too old now to get a job working for somebody else, so I think I'm stuck on this path.
Well, it's a great path. And you brought up Scott Fish a few times, and I feel like every episode of the show his name gets brought up at least
everyone
once.
Loves Scott Fish.
Yes, everyone loves Scott Fish. And Scott Fish Bowl, you had brought that up, and about how it's, like Mardi Gras, big party. When the Scott Fish Bowl kicks off, and, they have the pot-a-thon and everybody's, t-shirts and everything, like that kickoff moment, why do you think people are so excited to take part in that?
That's a good question. I think he's done it one, I think the timing helps. It's right there in a time where it's kind of the first draft for a lot of people. You know, they're kind of breaking into to what they're doing. The second is he's just done a good job of keeping it interesting, and having fun with it, and making it an attractive thing to do. And then and it's really good. It's good. It's just good. I don't know, camaraderie, I guess. I think he's done a great job of mixing in kind of industry people and not, and that's been super fun. So yeah, it's hard to pin it down why it's so fun. And the charity element of it is fun too. You know this, but I think our fantasy football community is a very generous place. And so there's always, I think that resonates with a lot of people, and it's kind of the same flavor I've got with that barbecue thing. I think that is sort of the same thing of people, can eat as something easy to get behind, and have fun with. And so, yeah, I love it. It's a fun time of the year. And yeah, Scott's my buddy. He's such a good guy.
Who really is. And I think that, I think Scott Fishbowl brings people together, and there are more and more analysts and people putting out fantasy content because of Scott Fishbowl and
Right.
the networking and everything else that comes along with that. And I know networking is a big part of getting your stuff out there and getting yourself heard. And I talk a lot about this with other people on the show, but about how some people feel like they don't want to overstep their boundaries or come off a certain way or be, I don't want to contact this guy because I don't want to bug him. But how can people go about networking without it coming off that way?
Yeah, that's and that's a hard thing because everybody wants to be, it's a crowded. I mean, what I was saying earlier about it's awesome that you can make a movie with your phone now. The problem with that for the creator is that everyone can make a movie with their phone now, and it's the same way in Twitter, right, or any community of we all can have a voice, but it's hard when everybody has a voice to stand out a little bit. And I think I'm no social scientist, Casey, but I think that's part of what drives some of the more not good behavior on Twitter is people are just trying to get attention. They're trying to act out, and this is how I'll get my foot in the door, is I'll be obnoxious, and that probably does get attention, but maybe not in the right way. But I think that the short answer and the honest answer on that is it's a continual, slow, steady effort of delivering value to the community. At least for me, it is when I notice someone if you want to get my attention, be that person that is out there continually bringing value and conducting yourself in a way that is like, man, they would be a good representative for our company to have on staff. And that's to me what I pay attention to anyway. And today, I mean, I tell young folks all the time, is like, your resume today is basically your social timeline. And so every employer I know, the first thing they do when they're considering hiring someone, they just go and check and see what's their Twitter profile look like or timeline look like. And that will tell. I mean, I always say, what do they say? Character is what you're doing when nobody's watching or whatever. And Twitter, people are watching, but it's sort of like most people don't think about applying for a job when they're posting on Twitter. Yeah. And so if and for good or bad, Twitter is somewhat revealing on some things. And so that would be my advice, is just continually bring content, deliver value.
That is great advice there. When you're putting out content and doing all this stuff, how do you find time to, like, do you ever feel burnt out, or that you need to take a break, take a nice step back and kind of just, I know fantasy football is your job, but also there has to be a little balance there.
Right. Well, I love it. We made this comment every year about this time. I send a note to our staff. It's like, y'all, I'm giving you full permission to punch me in the throat if I suggest we should do baseball content or basketball. I love it that there's a break, I mean, gosh, there's not much of a break, is there? But no. At least there's a break from the season of the games, and so Yeah, and you do have to manage that. I had this conversation with Dave Kluge, our mutual friend, and
Mhm.
and he was like, you got to pace yourself, dude. Like, this is not. I mean, I know you're young and have tons of energy and all this, but it's a long season, and it's just now April,
Yeah.
and it's like, so be careful. So I always is this, and we've done as society a better job about mental health and rest and that kind of stuff. And it doesn't mean lazy, I mean, like, the flip side, what some stuff, like, my pet peeve word now is sort of, well, not sort of, has definitely become grind, like grind. That's the way to do it. And it's weird because working hard is absolutely a giant part of this. I'm not saying you don't have to work hard, but you have to know yourself and be able to take a step back at times. And I mean, I think it's just healthy. Not, and there are not many. I think this is funny, Casey, and there's not many businesses where you get that opportunity like we have of a season. I mean, outside of being like a farmer, where you've got a real natural season, or literally a season. And it's funny. I think it's almost, I'm not sure that isn't like the most healthy way to work. Like, I don't know that that's how we as humans weren't designed, to have a seasonal type approach to things. And so I love it the way it works with football. Is like, this time we're knee deep now in design stuff and kind of boring back end stuff of how, customer flow goes and what happens when, this here happens or that happens, or, the kind of structure and the workflow of things. That's kind of boring stuff in some ways, but in some ways it's a lot of fun too. And then we'll, the same way we'll be planning. We're doing more planning stuff. What's our dynasty content plan? What's our Debbie plan? What's going to happen with commissioner stuff? What's going to, go here and there. And that's a, fun way to plan. And then come like July and August, that's our selling season. Then we're kind of like the farmer harvesting, the stuff there. We're actually, we make all of our money in about a 6-week window, which is really weird way to run a business, but that's reality. And then the season starts, and then it's just, 23 weeks of execution. Okay, we've said we're going to do all these things. We've made these promises to our customers. Now we have to deliver on this, and that's fun too. So it goes from being real creative in the summer of like, hey, what if we did this? Yeah, that'd be fun. I want to try that and come up with these creative ideas. And then you hit week one, and then it's Clayton Gray, our general manager, calls it Groundhog Week. It's literally 24 weeks of the same thing, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, every week. And that's kind of comforting too. It's like you don't have to think about any new ideas much, come that time. You're just delivering on what you promised. So, but I encourage people, be sensitive to that, burnout thing. And you just have to know yourself. It's self-awareness. And it doesn't mean slack, it doesn't mean slack off, but it also doesn't mean, work your face off every single day either. You work hard, but then you also can take enough to stay healthy, get plenty of sleep, and I'm, again, this is old man time here, but I've learned these things over the years. I mean, I used to be the guy that everyone, was marveling at. I could go with 2 hours sleep or whatever. And the reality of it is that catches up to you. You wind up being less productive, when you're doing that than you think.
Man, I'm just sitting here thinking about like, man, I feel you on the sleep thing, because like you feel you're not as stressed the next day. You can get, like you said, be more productive. Like
Mm-hmm.
the things you have to learn as you get older.
Yeah, right. Right.
Hey, I mean, that's great advice. What do you like to do in your free time when you're able to just like chill and do whatever you want to do for fun?
It sounds dumb, Casey, but I mean, this is why I don't, I wonder. I mean, you never say never. I don't ever like to talk in absolutes and all this. So who knows what might happen, but I envision myself doing this for 20 more years. I mean, and because I just love doing it. So, I mean, it sounds goofy, but in my free time, I think about like business stuff. I mean, that's my hobby. It's not like
That's
I'm a
awesome.
workaholic on it. It's like, no, I really enjoy, how to come up with a different marketing message, or learning about that, or reading about how other people have done it. And I mean, I love music and movies and barbecue and all that. So I have plenty of other stuff to keep me going, but this really doesn't feel, I mean, it sounds too cliche to say it doesn't feel like work. It is work sometimes, but I enjoy the game of it. To me, it's a game. I don't play golf. I don't have that many other real hobbies outside of, this kind of stuff, but this is what I like to do for fun. So it doesn't really feel like working.
No, that's awesome. And it's really cool to see that. I mean, a lot of people I've talked to are like, yeah, it doesn't feel like work, and I enjoy doing it. So it's really cool to be able to see all of you go out there and do things that, because a lot of people, me included, are like, oh, I go to work every day and I work to get off from work. So it's cool to see,
right. Right.
Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up since, I did go to work today and now I'm here, but this is the best part of my day, right? Is being able to talk to you. So,
well, thank you. This has been super fun for me.
Yeah, it's been and very knowledgeable. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody listening has too. Can you go ahead and just one more time tell everybody where they can find you and what kind of stuff you got going down?
Yeah, footballguys.com is the easiest way, Casey. And then the easiest way to engage with us is right there on the site. We have a area to sign up for our email update, and we'll give a ton of free content away. Right now, we're doing it twice a week. We have one that comes out on Monday morning and Friday morning. And it's just a taste of what we're doing. And then once the draft hits, that'll turn into a daily thing. But you can see what we're doing there. Tons of content right on the site. Basically, it's in a nutshell, it's the tools we think you ought to have to win more at fantasy football. That's the site in a nutshell. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people win. And that's really what it comes down to for us.
Well, we appreciate that. And everyone needs to go check out footballguys.com and make sure that you go check out Joe Bryant's Twitter as well. And make sure you also come back next week for another episode of Get Real with Casey Kasem and stay rad.
Thank you, Casey.
You're very welcome.